The show had already been moving for nearly 2 hours when the atmosphere began to shift in a way no one could quite explain. Nothing dramatic had happened. No controversial finish. No visible injury. And yet, the arena felt tighter, like the air had thinned without warning. The crowd noise dipped at strange moments, conversation stalling mid-sentence. Even the energy from the ring seemed restrained, as if the performers themselves sensed something circling just outside the light. Commentary tried to keep the rhythm steady, but their words carried hesitation. They repeated small observations, buying time without admitting they were buying time. The camera would cut to the crowd and linger a second too long on faces that weren't cheering or booing, just watching, waiting. It was the kind of tension that didn't come from storyline or rivalry. It felt external, unplanned. Backstage, the monitors flickered between matches and crowd shots, but eyes weren't focused on the screens. They were focused on each other. There had been whispers all week. Quiet calls, subtle schedule adjustments, a locker moved. A private meeting behind a closed office door. Nobody had confirmed anything, and yet nobody dismissed it either. The kind of rumor that doesn't fade because it never needed proof. In the ring, a match concluded cleanly, but the reaction felt muted. Applause scattered instead of erupting. The referee raised a hand that no one fully acknowledged. It was as if the audience was holding energy back, saving it for something they weren't sure was coming. Then the lights didn't cut. The music didn't hit. There was no dramatic interruption. There was only a pause. A long unclaimed pause. Commentary fell silent mid-thought. The arena, once buzzing, turned into a chamber of layered murmurs. People stood not because they were prompted, but because sitting felt wrong. The Titantron remained dark. No graphics, no flashing colors. Just the hum of the building itself, and then the screen shifted. No introduction, no catchphrase, just a name. Jade Cargill. It didn't explode across the screen. It didn't animate. It appeared, plain and still, like a statement rather than an announcement. The reaction wasn't immediate. It was delayed, like the crowd needed to process whether they were actually seeing it. A ripple of disbelief moved outward from the front rows to the highest seats. Some people gasped. Others stared in silence. A few laughed nervously, unsure if this was real or a tease. There was no music yet, just that name. And in that moment, the unease turned into something heavier. Because if it was real, if she was really back, then this wasn't going to be a celebration. This was going to be a reckoning. The stage remained empty for several seconds longer than comfortable. And in that silence, something settled over the arena. Not excitement, not nostalgia. Pressure. The kind that doesn't ask for applause, the kind that demands adjustment. And the unsettling realization that whatever was about to walk through that curtain wasn't returning to fit into the system. The music never came. Instead, the curtain moved. Not with urgency, not with spectacle. It shifted slowly, deliberately, as if whoever stood behind it had no intention of rushing for anyone. The crowd leaned forward collectively, thousands of bodies unconsciously mirroring one another. The arena lights didn't change. No dramatic strobe. No heroic spotlight. Everything remained stark and unforgiving. And then she stepped out. Jade Cargill didn't pose. She didn't raise her arms. She didn't scan the crowd for validation. She walked forward with the kind of stillness that absorbs noise instead of reacting to it. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't smiling. It was controlled, focused, almost clinical. The first audible reaction was confusion. A wave of scattered cheers collided with stunned silence. Some fans shouted her name. Others remained frozen, arms crossed, as if trying to determine what this meant for the division they thought they understood. Commentary spoke over each other briefly, their voices slightly higher than usual. Words like unexpected and shocking floated through the broadcast, but even those felt insufficient. There was no frame of reference, no build, no warning. She stopped halfway down the ramp, not dramatically, simply stopped. The crowd noise dipped again. The weight of her presence felt disproportionate to the motion. She hadn't done anything yet. No gesture, no confrontation. And still, the atmosphere tightened further. In the ring, the competitor who had just won the previous match stood stiffly, championship belt still over her shoulder. Her posture changed without her realizing it. The confidence from minutes ago drained subtly from her stance. She didn't look threatened. She looked recalculating. Jade resumed walking. Every step was measured, deliberate, unhurried. She wasn't feeding off the crowd. She wasn't acknowledging them at all. It was as if the arena didn't exist, only the destination did. When she reached the ring, she paused again. No trash talk. No pointing. No smirk. She climbed the steps slowly and stepped between the ropes with the ease of someone who never forgot where she belonged. The two women stood across from each other, separated by a few feet and a shift in power that everyone felt but no one could articulate. The champion didn't back down. But she didn't step forward either. The silence stretched. Commentary lowered their voices, almost whispering, as if raising them would fracture the moment. The crowd's reaction fractured instead, half chanting, half staring. Phones were raised, but hands trembled slightly, capturing history without understanding its direction. Jade looked at the title belt for a brief second. Then she looked at the woman holding it. And that was enough. No attack came, no physical contact. She simply turned, stepped back through the ropes, and exited the ring the same way she entered, controlled, unapologetic, and disturbingly calm. The tension didn't release when she left. It stayed, because the message wasn't delivered through violence. It was delivered through presence. And presence, when it carries that much certainty, doesn't need to say a word. By the time she disappeared behind the curtain again, the arena wasn't loud. It was unsettled. And everyone understood something without it being stated. WWE hadn't prepared for this. Not like this. The show continued, but it didn't recover. Matches unfolded with technical precision, but the audience watched differently now. Every entrance felt smaller. Every celebration seemed premature. Commentary returned to normal cadence, yet there was an undercurrent they couldn't smooth out. They referenced the return carefully, choosing neutral language, avoiding commitment. It wasn't hype. It wasn't condemnation. It was uncertainty disguised as professionalism. Backstage, the silence was louder. In the women's locker room, conversations fractured into whispers. Some athletes avoided eye contact altogether, pretending to focus on taping wrists or checking their phones. Others spoke in hushed tones, trying to calculate where they stood in a hierarchy that had just shifted without warning. Jade hadn't said anything publicly. That made it worse. A declaration can be debated. A threat can be prepared for. Silence, however, leaves space for imagination. And imagination in a competitive environment turns quickly into fear. One veteran leaned against a locker, staring at the floor longer than necessary. She had spent years building credibility, grinding through injuries and scrutiny. Now, one entrance had redirected the spotlight without a single move thrown. It wasn't resentment she felt. It was displacement. In the production office, executives monitored social media metrics climbing in real time. Clips of the entrance circulated instantly. Headlines formed within minutes. Was this planned? Was it a power play? Was creative losing control or regaining it? The questions came faster than the answers. Authority figures exchanged tight smiles in front of cameras, projecting confidence they did not fully feel. Internally, schedules were being reworked. Future main events reconsidered. Contracts reviewed with new urgency. A return like this wasn't just narrative. It was leverage. Meanwhile, outside the arena, debate erupted. Fans argued across timelines and comment sections. Some celebrated the dominance, praising the restraint. Others criticized the disruption, questioning whether the division needed this kind of gravitational force again. Analysts dissected body language frame by frame, searching for hidden messages in glances and posture. At home, family members watched the footage replayed repeatedly on sports networks. Pride mixed with pressure. A comeback carries expectation. A dominant one carries scrutiny. Jade's name trended not because of spectacle, but because of what she hadn't done, and that absence of action created consequences. The champion who had stood across from her that night posted nothing. No bravado, no defiance. Silence answered silence. It became a psychological standoff before a single contract was signed. The next morning, locker room arrivals felt different. Conversations paused when doors opened. Some competitors trained harder, pushing reps past comfort. Others looked distracted, as if reassessing long-term plans. Careers are fragile at the top. One presence can alter trajectories without touching them. Jade herself remained unreachable. No interviews, no statements. Only footage. Only that walk. Only that look at the title. WE programming had gained momentum overnight, but internally, equilibrium had fractured. Creative direction now revolved around someone who hadn't spoken a word. And in that vacuum, pressure expanded. Because when dominance returns quietly, it doesn't ask for permission. It forces everyone else to decide whether they're prepared to survive it. The days that followed were louder than the night itself. Morning shows dissected the footage with forced enthusiasm, but beneath the polished analysis was visible tension. Industry insiders debated whether the return signaled long-term commitment or strategic positioning. Some framed it as a bold move by management. Others whispered about negotiations that may have shifted power behind closed doors. Within headquarters, meetings stretched longer than usual. Creative teams mapped potential storylines on whiteboards, erasing and rewriting arcs that had once felt stable. Champions scheduled for major events now found their trajectories rerouted. Sponsors requested clarity. Networks asked pointed questions about direction and stability. The pressure wasn't just narrative. It was structural. In the locker room, factions quietly formed. Younger talent viewed the moment as both threat and opportunity. A dominant figure can block advancement, but it can also create the highest-profile rivalries. Veterans, however, understood something deeper. Dominance isn't only physical, it's psychological. And Jade had already established control without lifting a finger. Training intensity increased across the roster. Conditioning sessions ran longer. Sparring grew sharper. Not out of panic, but preparation. The unspoken understanding was clear. If she targeted you, you couldn't afford hesitation. Yet the most unexpected tension centered on Jade herself. Expectations crystallized instantly. Social media praise transformed into scrutiny overnight. Could she sustain the aura? Would the mystique fade once the bell rang? Dominance is easiest in silence. Sustaining it under weekly spotlight requires precision few can maintain. Family felt the weight too. Phone calls from relatives carried pride laced with concern. Public attention reopens old narratives, old comparisons, old judgments. Success amplifies everything, support and criticism alike. Every move now held amplified consequence. The champion finally addressed the return days later in a brief interview. Her voice was steady, but her phrasing careful. She welcomed competition. She respected strength. She did not concede territory. It was professional. It was measured. It did not conceal the reality that her reign now carried a shadow. Ticket sales spiked for upcoming events. Merchandise projections recalculated. But financial gain didn't erase internal unease. We thrives on controlled chaos. This felt less controlled. Meanwhile, Jade remained disciplined in silence. She trained publicly, posting minimal statements, letting footage of her workouts speak in controlled bursts. Every image reinforced physical dominance without offering emotional access. Colleagues described her backstage demeanor as focused, not hostile. Polite, but distant. She wasn't reclaiming friendships. She was reclaiming position. And that difference mattered. Because this wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't redemption. It was assertion. Weeks of programming now hinged on a single looming confrontation that hadn't been officially announced. Anticipation grew heavy, not celebratory. The division's balance felt precarious, as if one decisive moment could redefine years of work. WWE wasn't just managing a storyline. It was managing gravity. And gravity, once reintroduced, doesn't ask who's comfortable. It simply pulls. By the time the contract signing was finally announced, the industry felt suspended between inevitability and dread. The match had not yet happened, yet its presence dominated every conversation. Analysts spoke about legacy implications. Veterans discussed timing and risk. Younger talent watched closely, aware that whatever unfolded would reshape opportunity for years. The night of the face-to-face arrived without spectacle. No elaborate staging. No overproduction. Just 2 chairs, a table, and the weight of weeks unspoken. The champion entered first, composed but visibly sharper in her movements. Jade followed with the same deliberate pace from her return, her expression unchanged, unreadable. They sat across from one another. No insults were traded. No theatrics unfolded. The tension wasn't explosive, it was compressed. The champion spoke about responsibility, about defending a division built on resilience. Jade responded calmly, stating only that dominance doesn't ask for validation. It demonstrates it. The room felt smaller as they signed. When the pens touched paper, the audience reaction wasn't roaring approval. It was a collective exhale, as though something inevitable had finally been acknowledged. Afterward, as the show closed without physical confrontation, the gravity of it settled further. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about control of a future that suddenly felt fragile. Backstage, the atmosphere remained divided. Some wrestlers felt inspired, driven by the elevated standard. Others felt squeezed, aware that spotlight narrows when stars collide. Management projected confidence publicly, but contingency plans layered every production meeting. Media coverage intensified. Headlines questioned whether this was a renaissance or a risk. Debates centered not on if Jade could win, but on what her victory or defeat would mean for structural hierarchy. A loss could humanize her. A win could destabilize everything. At home, Jade prepared quietly. Training footage surfaced in fragments. Interviews remained sparse. Friends described her as focused, but aware of the stakes extending beyond a championship. Dominance carries burden. Every expectation becomes a silent opponent. The night of her return had not felt celebratory. It felt disruptive. Now, weeks later, that disruption had matured into something heavier, inevitability. And yet, beneath the analysis, beneath the metrics and projections, one truth lingered unspoken. He had survived countless returns before. Legends had come and gone. Titles had changed hands. Systems had adjusted. But this felt different because it wasn't built on nostalgia or spectacle. It was built on silence, on presence, on a reminder that power doesn't need to shout to reshape a room. As the screen fades on this chapter of uncertainty, one question remains heavier than any championship belt. When dominance walks back into a system unannounced and refuses to explain itself, is the system strong enough to absorb it, or does it quietly begin to bend?